And we are live. It is Sunday, August 23rd, 2020, 5:01 p.m., 2:01 p.m. Pacific Time, 10:01 p.m. Greenwich Daylight Savings Time. It is a beautiful, hot August Sunday in Washington. I assume it is something like that in New Jersey and Cape Cod. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yes.
We are not allowed to have fun anymore. But in lieu of fun, we are allowed to have dirty martinis, dog shirts, and mystery guests. And our mystery guest this Sunday is the great Anne Milgram, who I'm surprised more of you did not vote for, given that we talked about her at some length on the show yesterday.
That's why I didn't vote for her.
So are you telling me that I came in last and I still joined?
No, you did not come in last. Actually, the vote so this was not a vote on who they wanted. It was a vote on who they thought I had scored as the mystery guest. And it was I have to say it was embarrassing a few weeks ago when I did this and our mystery guest in fact came in last. But you came in second. John Lovett came in first with 43.6%.
Yeah.
And then there's like a near three-way tie, but we're going to pretend it's not that close. You came in second with 19.8%. Jamel Bowie close on your heels at 19.5%. And James Fallows a distant third at distant fourth at 17%. So it's kind of all bunched up there. But you definitely scraped by with the silver medal. Anne is a former federal prosecutor, former state prosecutor, former attorney general of New Jersey, which gives you the distinction of being the first person with the title attorney general who has ever been on In Lieu of Fun. We've had a state treasurer. We've had assistant attorneys general, we may have even had a deputy attorney general, but you're the first actual AG we've had. And of course, most of you know Anne from the Cafe Insider podcast series. Welcome to In Lieu of Fun.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I want to start with the question. It's a deep ethical question that I've been struggling with for 3 days now. Is it morally wrong to be gleeful at the arrest of Steve Bannon under the particular circumstances that happened? I know that I want somebody to tell me that it's okay.
Well, I might not be the right person on that. So I feel very strongly that, look, I get it. It's funny, a lot of people were surprised. It was like any other piece of news that I almost expected to see, right? Which is a terrible thing to say in the world we live in, that we sort of are not surprised by something.
No, but you didn't expect the yacht.
I didn't expect the yacht. I didn't expect the yacht, nor did I
expect the yacht was what made it delicious.
Yes, there were a couple amazing pieces. The yacht, and look, I've done a lot of political corruption cases, and I've done a lot of fraud cases like this, and it really is. I mean, I still don't fully understand how, when you think about what will come out in this case, will be countless emails, text messages, like a concerted effort. The way they set up a shell company, they set up a shell nonprofit, right? It is a lot of steps that people are taking to conceal action that are completely traceable. And there's this level of hubris, of just belief of being above the law, so that's what's shocking to me, actually. And I admit to always being shocked by this when I see it. It's how is it possible that somebody like Steve Bannon, who knows he's potentially going to be in the crosshair, right? He's high profile. And once you're high profile, that he would do it in this way. And yes, to be on the yacht of the Chinese billionaire. Some of the other details were also, the lead guy basically buying an SUV, buying a boat, the whole connection with the Trump flotillas and the boats was also surprising. But I'll just say one thing, like my view, having been a state, local, and federal prosecutor, is that, there are times where things feel right and righteous, and that's sort of how I felt about this. But I never personally take joy in it, although I understand that Steve Bannon has thrown a lot of elbows, and so I suspect a lot of people who've gotten those elbows they're not crying a tear for him.
So I want to confess
political. That it was like Steve Bannon has thrown some elbows. It's like the man is made out of elbows.
Yeah, he is.
But wait, I want to confess something, which is I really did not see this coming. So, if you had asked me, I don't forget whether this happened Wednesday or Thursday, but the day before, whenever it happened, which of the Trump insiders is least likely to be a grifter? I would have said Steve Bannon. He seems like somebody, he left a Goldman Sachs job to...
What do you think Goldman Sachs is?
But it's also a race to the bottom in that question, right? Because it's kind of like your second place tie. There are a lot of people who could be in the bucket of...
Okay, but I thought he would be... I've Steve Bannon, and I don't mean this as damning with faint praise or praising with faint damn, because he's a genuinely bad guy. But I've always, as that scene in the Big Lebowski where the John Goodman character says, well, say what you will about National Socialism, it's at least a coherent ideology. And that's kind of the way I've always thought of Steve Bannon, like he's now, not that the Nazis weren't corrupt, right? Goering stole a lot of art and all that jazz. But, I've always thought of Bannon as somebody who actually believed in something, albeit something really repellent. And so I was a little surprised, not at all surprised by the tawdry stuff that Roger Stone has done or the stuff that Mike Flynn has done. But, Bannon actually seemed to me like something of a true believer. And the idea that he was, on the side bilking people for their small, $27 contributions to the wall, I wouldn't have called that one.
Yeah, I mean, both things can be true, though, right? I mean, he can both be someone who has these political views that, feel coherent to his followers, and also just a grifter stealing money. I mean, remember, when you take a window into most political corruption cases, the amounts are often small, but there are a lot of them. And the thing is, you capture a snapshot in time, right? And so all we have here, if you think about it, all we have for Steve Bannon is right now, all we know about is the behind the wall, right? The build the wall piece. But I mean, my feeling when I see stuff like this is this whole idea comes up to build this nonprofit, to build a fake shell company. I mean, these are not folks who this is the first time they've ever done it, in my view. Right now, the government has to prove what's in the indictment, but it just feels like a little too, I always think with political corruption, you see the slice of time the government can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. That doesn't mean it's never happened before. So it's not like I think he woke up one day and decided, I want to get a $20, piece of jewelry or free Uber rides. I sort of think people are who they are. But again, the government, just to be clear, he's indicted on money fraud and wire fraud, and that's all the government has to prove.
So I have a slightly different take from Bannon, although I understand when he explains his kind of surprise, where he's coming from, because Bannon is a true believer. But to me, and I don't know anything about Bannon's finances or where he came from, except that he came from Goldman Sachs or whatever, but it really strikes me as one of these things that you're doing it and it's not clear, you're just, I don't know, he strikes me as a person who didn't come from a ton of money, and maybe it's because of I don't know, it just always struck me that he didn't come from a ton of money if I just had to guess. And I would say that he just kind of got to this level in which he's hanging out in politics with all of these people that in particular, like the Trumps and all of their kind of cohort, have a tremendous amount of money, and that there is like a pressure to keep up. And that there is all of a sudden, as you said, kind of these moments of like, I think what happens to people when they kind of suddenly get thrown into the spotlight in the way that Steve Bannon did in the last kind of couple of years, and a couple, I mean like 5, that there's just kind of like, I think it does become intoxicating, the free things, like the small moments of, like the Ted, like, so I know I mentioned this before, but the Ted Stevens case just reminds me of this. Don Young case reminds me of this. Just these small moments of little things for free that it's like ends up weaving them all together. It's an entire case of like white collar crime, or like, as like Ben reminded me, is like he was not a politician, so there wasn't the same duty of like kind of disclosing things. But yeah, I think fraud is so often happens like that. I wonder if you agree.
Yeah, I mean, the case I always think about was the Essex County, New Jersey executive, who was a guy named James Treffinger, and he basically ran for office as the Essex County executive, and that's the person that controls all the money for Essex County, right, which is a big New Jersey county. Newark is there, and so he had access to, millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. He told this story. He ultimately became a government cooperator after he was caught after years of corruption. Of basically, one of the first days he's sitting in a room, that everybody leaves the meeting and there's an envelope on the table, right? And he picks up the envelope and it's like, whatever, $2,000, it's cash. And, he has this whole thought process of, oh, it's not that much money. Like, I was going to do the thing they asked me for anyway. He takes the money. And he goes on to tell this really compelling story of, from that moment on, everyone knew I could be bought, right? Like, just what felt easy in that moment becomes the thing, right? That leads to that, like, the door was open, and then there were countless ways in which he was corrupt and convicted, and ultimately turned into a cooperator.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting point, because it actually goes to the thing that I think people don't understand about Donald Trump and the Russians, which is, if you are Donald Trump, so this goes to the question of whether the president is compromised, which everybody takes as a question about, like, is there a P-tape, or are they running him as a kind of Manchurian candidate, right? Agent sort of thing. And the reality is much more subtle than that, but also totally out there in the public. So think about the day that the president said, I have no business with Russia. I have no connections with Russia. I have nothing to do with Russia. And he says that while he is, in fact, negotiating for Trump Tower Moscow. So at the point at which he says that, the Russians know he's lying. He knows he's lying. And he knows the Russians know he's lying. That's compromised.
Yeah, that's it.
Right?
That's like the textbook definition.
Because at that point, he knows that they can expose the lie anytime. They don't have to ask anything of him. But it's in this case, he left the envelope with cash on the table for himself and then took it. It's a total self-own. But, we think of Compromat as this folder of, pictures of you with the beautiful woman at the bar who you should have had the fortitude to resist. But it's whatever your vulnerabilities are that people, it can be very minor if you feel strongly enough about it that it will change your behavior to protect. And that's, of course, exactly what you're describing with relatively low-grade corruption, that at least when you first took that envelope, you could probably honestly say, since I was going to do the thing anyway, it wasn't for a thing of value. I didn't do it in exchange for a thing of value. I did it and I took a thing of value, and there was no quid pro quo because I never talked to anybody about it. Yep. But you're ashamed enough of having done it that to protect it, you will do all kinds of other things.
Yeah, and look, you've also sent the message to the person who gave it to you, just like think about Michael Flynn when he lied publicly and the Russians knew he lied, right? I mean, it's exactly the same scenario you're talking about where other people know that you're lying, and that's what puts you in the position of being compromised, and then you start making decisions based on that, right? And it's really hard to see anything good that ever comes, as we know from those situations.
All right, so next question. How do we understand the Berman story? And for those of you who don't remember, this is the firing of Jeffrey Berman by Bill Barr. And yes, I know I said nice things about Bill Barr once upon a time. You don't have to remind me. I'm not talking to you, Anne. I'm talking to the...
Preet gets reminded.
Preet did the same. Yeah, although Preet doesn't get reminded the way I do. I have an active influence operation reminding me of this.
You have
and
an
so I just always
unforgiven from someone in the feed.
yeah. No. It's a. Although that's Tony Kava, he's joking. But no. There's a whole like if I tweet the weather's nice today, someone will respond, but you vouched for Barr, you know?
Yeah, we'll never trust your weather. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. How do we understand the Berman story differently in light of this, or do we?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated by this, and I don't have an answer yet, and I think we may never get a full answer, right? We know the investigation started a year ago. It's been reported that Barr was briefed a few months ago. My guess is he was briefed in the sense of we have an active investigation into people associated with this. One of the people we're looking at that's included in this group is Steve Bannon. Probably not more than that. Like probably not he's definitely going to be charged at this point. Probably just the really high level, like, you never sort of want people not to see incoming and to have it on their radar screen. But it's hard not to connect this with Berman's ouster, right? It's hard for all of us sitting there. And, part of it is that there have been so many actions like Barr lied about it. And so we know he remember he was supposed to talk to Berman again. And instead he drops that press release saying, he's resigned, which wasn't true. So it's really hard to give any benefit of the doubt to Barr on this. I said at the time, and I still think it's true, we have no idea what Southern is looking at. And so this is one thing. There could be a lot of other things. And I would say, Southern, it's an excellent U.S. Attorney's Office. They make their cases really carefully, really thoughtfully. And so what I think is it possibly this? The answer is yes, but is it possibly something else? And again, the reason I also attribute an ill motive to Bill Barr, whether or not it is directly linked to the Bannon case or not, is that it just makes no sense, right?
It makes no sense.
Like there is no credible, his explanation of, I want to put in the SEC chair, who's a civil lawyer, has absolutely, in my view, not qualified to be the U.S. attorney of one of the two most important U.S. attorney's offices in the United States of America, right? The finance industries in the Southern District, the Eastern District of Virginia and the Southern District have always been two of the leading offices. Don't tell my New Jersey people that, but they're really important. And also, of course, I'm a DOJ alum, but those offices are really important. So it just makes no sense. And if you really wanted to do it for Clayton to get him back to New York, the SEC chair, you would just wait till after the election. You would just wait 6 months, right? Until it would be natural for some U.S. attorneys to leave. So I think it's
and there's another reason too, I think, which is that he lied about it.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, so I could attribute a lot of things to a misunderstanding and to, he has a kind of hardline view of executive power and they want their people in, and Berman's, from his point of view, been kind of an asshole. But then he announces that Berman is stepping down, having failed to procure Berman's agreement to step down. That's not a good faith act.
Agreed.
And, I think that's the point at which you say, well, whatever else, and I agree with all the points you made, the underlying logic of it is weak as hell too. But when the underlying logic is weak and you're lying about it, I think you really lose the presumption of regularity.
Yeah. So the other thing I think is really interesting here, just reading a little bit between the lines, is that it feels to me, and I'm speculating, I have no inside information, but it looks like they did not alert Barr until the indictment was about to be unsealed. So what that means is that the prosecutors went into the grand jury, and this happens all the time, and got the grand jury returned an indictment, and they did it under seal, meaning for whatever reason, they're not going to publicly announce it yet. And it's common to basically return it under seal and then to unseal it. And there can be a variety of reasons they're doing it. They're continuing to investigate. They're dropping subpoenas. Remember, they just did 6 search warrants, right, along with the arrest of Bannon. And I think that's particularly interesting. Like, they raided not just the boat. They took Bannon's phone, but they went to 5 different locations around the country. So that tells me they're looking for stuff, and they know basically what they're looking for, because you have to make those representations to a judge. So all of that. So then they unseal it on Thursday, at which point just before that they tell Barr, right? So Bannon's already charged. The deed is done. There's nothing Barr can do to put that back in the box. That's what it feels like very clearly from the language that's being used, which basically means like they gave him a big heads up a few months ago, like, hey, we're looking at this. And then all of a sudden it's like, bam, it's done.
An hour, yeah, it's done, and the arrest is happening 4 hours from now, unless you pull the plug, in which case you have a scandal on your hands.
And you literally can't pull it because the grand jury's already voted. So like, you could tell them to undo it, they can't undo it. They could dismiss the case, but again, it's like, it's like walking something back versus saying don't do it. And so,
right.
Think about even the Michael Flynn thing, where now they're arguing. Barr's arguing dismiss the Michael Flynn case. They're all back and forth in the DC circuit. This is the kind of thing where, like, now they have to undo it if they want to undo it, and that's very hard. And that tells me the Southern District was concerned about political influence, and they were trying to do anything they could to avoid it. That they were basically saying, like, no, we're independent. We'll let you know what we're doing, but you can't control what we're doing. That's my read. Again, no inside information.
And if you were, go ahead, Kate.
No, go ahead then.
And if you were Audrey Strauss, that's how you would have played it, right?
100%. Because
right.
Let's say, so like we're speculating that this case could have something to do with Berman being fired, but even if it doesn't, the whole thing where, remember, they were trying not to put Audrey Strauss in, they were trying to put the New Jersey U.S. attorney in, which makes no sense. It was just bizarre, and it was like they were trying to put in their loyalist, and it goes completely against the way these things are done. So she has to know they wanted a political person in for a reason. And so, she definitely, I think I would have done exactly the same thing she did here.
Yeah. So to take it kind of in a different, to kind of leave the current politics aside, I'm actually just super interested and have questions about what it's been like for you to switch between all of these different offices, frankly. Like, you see a lot of people move through different jobs in federal government and different jobs in state government. But my former federal judge that I clerked for in the EDNY had been in the New York State Assembly for 26 years. And I always found that to be an incredible ability to kind of go from being an expert in New York state law to switch to the federal rules of civil procedure and everything else. And so I'm kind of just like interested in knowing what that's been like. Is there a huge kind of learning curve between the different types of state, local, and federal governments that you've kind of been with?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, so I started as an assistant DA in Manhattan, which is one of my favorite jobs of all time, and absolutely just drinking from a fire hose, right? Just processing a ton of cases, trying a ton of cases. I did domestic violence, I did some sex crimes, but I did everything. You literally almost never sit at your desk. I don't think in 3.5 years I ever actually ate lunch sitting a meal at a desk. And then I went to the federal system, to DOJ, the civil rights criminal, where I became the lead human trafficking prosecutor. But what's really different about that is it's like the exact opposite, right? The feds get to pick their cases. And so, in the state office, the police make an arrest, they bring a case to the assistant DA. You have to decide, am I taking that case? Am I not taking that case? But basically, the wheels have already started. And whereas with the federal system, we were able to sit back and say, actually, go issue these 10 subpoenas, talk to these 20 witnesses, and then we'll decide if we'll even open an or if we'll open an investigation or bring a case. So, and you have just a lot more resources in the federal system. In terms of going back and forth between the law, I think, you would be surprised, but you sort of learn how to read statutes and laws, and you get kind of used to that, and fill in whatever it is. But
I'm
I'll
not
tell
like
you,
super surprised at that, but your point is really is one that I think people just do not appreciate, is how like the procedure works differently in state and federal systems, and the resources of having special versus general jurisdiction, whether you're on the judge side, or whether you're having kind of what you described, the ability to drive your own cases and your own investigations, means like the resources are delegated completely differently.
Totally. And the feds cases are they get to pick them, right? And there's some, like terrorism, obviously they're always going to do, but there are a lot of cases where they have a lot more leeway. I'll tell you the two biggest things that have been in my career that have been like difficult or switches. One was, as AG, I oversaw all the civil litigation for the state of New Jersey. So when you're a criminal prosecutor, cases tend to move within like 12 to 18 months. Like occasionally a case will go 2 years. I literally walked into civil cases that have been going for 10 years, for a decade. And I was like, what's wrong with you people? Like, it's just, but it's a really different system. And there's a lot of problems with the system that goes on for that long. But that was like really hard for me to understand why. And some of it's lawyering, frankly, that it's good for the lawyers for matters to go on for a long time. It's, in my view, often not good for the people's lives behind it. But the second biggest thing I'll tell you is, when I first came in as AG, a prior AG had taken over the Camden, New Jersey Police Department. So on day one, I ran the Camden Police Department. And you've heard a lot about Camden and the police reform. I started that.
Yeah, my mom actually went to Rutgers Camden for law school.
That's great. That's great.
Sorry, but anyway, yes, I've heard a lot about Camden.
I'm a Rutgers undergrad. Yes, and I'm a
nice.
Rutgers undergrad. But, literally what we did in that police department over 3 years, Scott was my fifth chief, like Scott Thompson, who's now the chief. And it's by far the hardest thing I've ever done in my career. And I had zero, I'd worked with police officers, I'd worked with agents, but the idea of actually going into the most dangerous city of America and trying to figure out, why does nothing work here? What's broken? Was completely, and I think some of my lack of understanding of it actually ended up being a strength in the end, because I didn't accept the sort of, standard answer that you get when you've worked in any institution for a long time. But it was by far and away, that was the hardest thing ever. And the most different.
But Anne, I want to ask a related question before we go to audience questions. You did a very unusual thing in your career, which is being a federal prosecutor. I don't mean to group you with Chris Kobach, but you stopped being a federal prosecutor to become a state AG. That's a pretty unusual move. Just talk about how you came to make that decision. It's a big change. It's pretty common to have somebody who's a U.S. attorney run for, I don't know, in the famous case, Rudy Giuliani runs for Chris Christie runs for, right? But you were an AUSA and a Justice Department official at the career level who leaves and goes and runs for state AG. That's a pretty unusual move.
But I didn't run. So New Jersey is one of those really unusual places, right? And so I think it would be more unusual your scenario where for AGs who run. But there are 5 states, I think 5 or 6, where the AG is either appointed, or New Hampshire, I think it's the governor appoints, but the Senate and House, the local state legislature has to approve, or maybe but there are really just a handful of states where the AGs are politically appointed. New Jersey is one of them. So I was at DOJ, I think, 4.5 plus years. I loved it. I was doing all the human trafficking cases, and literally every week, that's where all the work happens, right? So I was in a different city, in a different state, and I loved it. But there was, a point in time where I was like, God, I gotta get to my apartment in Washington, D.C. And so I jumped to Capitol Hill. Corzine's counsel had just left. He was looking for a counsel. I grew up in New Jersey, and I was sort of trying to decide what to do next. He became governor. I had said I would never go back with him, and within a month, I'd agreed to go back as the first assistant AG. And most of it was just, the AG in New Jersey, because it's a political appointment, it really is probably one of, if not the most powerful AG's office in the country. The AG is the chief law enforcement officer. Again, that's because the AG is a political appointment. But I mean, it's an incredible, 10,000 person office.
All right. David Batts, who is not Daniel. The floor is yours.
Well, thanks so much, Anne. Really great to have you on here. I will tell you, my favorite episodes of Stay Tuned are the ones that feature you, because it's awesome hearing you and Preet go back and forth. It's really fabulous. On a more serious note, but related, is what is your estimation of the damage that has been done to justice, U.S. Justice Department, and how long will this take to fix?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to say I don't think it's a lot, but I really do think it's a lot, the damage that's been done. And I worry so much because a lot of the greatest folks that I know who've been there, some have left. And even for those who haven't, the job is going to be to convince also the American public that DOJ is fair. Like, we just had this whole conversation about Jeff Berman being fired, right? And, all of us, I think, are rightly skeptical of law enforcement. And we should always question law enforcement. We should always put the proof to the test. But this is just a whole different level of an effort to really undercut the rule of law. And that is, and to politicize investigations. I mean, look, I think also there'll be pressure if Biden wins. There will be pressure on him to investigate Trump and Trump's associates, right? And so, Bill Barr, I think all of us can agree, he's done this thing where he's investigating the investigators. And now people are going to ask to investigate Barr, right? I mean, it's sort of like the next AG has to really pull politics out of it, follow the facts and the law if there are cases to be made, but really try to just like build up the strength of the office. And also, I think for what it's worth, and I don't know, you guys probably talk about this a lot, but I think the last 4 years have shown us that the Office of Legal Counsel memos, like, there are real questions they're almost the force of law. They're usually done behind closed doors. Like, what should that process really look like? The ruling on whether the president, like what a special counsel should look like. I think one of the problems with the Mueller investigation, and you guys are really in the weeds on this, but the fact is, like, that fell under the AG. So a lot of the stuff that Barr was able to do came out of the structure. And I always think when something goes wrong, you have to ask of, like, is the structure wrong? And I think here the answer is probably yes. So they should look at what a special counsel process would be. Congress should look at that as well. So the long answer is, like, yes, it's going to take a huge amount of work. I think it's totally doable. I can say this, I don't know the political party of any of the men or women I worked with at DOJ. Like, I don't know the political affiliation. Most of the agents are actually Republican. I mean, that's like the only thing is, like, most of them tend to be more conservative. But, like, I feel like the next person has to come in and just sort of gain both confidence internally and publicly.
Yeah, can I just add something to that I think one of the things the next AG is going to have to do in a way that's going to be really uncomfortable is talk to the public. Because this is a fraught subject, because when Jim Comey talked to the public about the decision making in the Hillary Clinton email campaign, he got attacked for that. When Bob Mueller didn't talk to the public enough in many people's views, including about uncharged criminal matters, he got attacked for that. We don't really know what we want from these people in terms of explanatory material about their decision making. But I really do think if the public is going to have confidence that executive branch law enforcement decisions are being made on the merits, particularly in non-pros situations, they're going to have to know more about the deficiencies of cases than we're traditionally comfortable telling them. And I don't know how you do that or what the norms that you can create are, but there's something about it can't be wrong to do both what Mueller did and what Comey did, right? It can't be Comey's joke about this that shows up in his book is, one of the agents says to him, "We're really damned if we do and damned if we don't," right? And Comey says, "Yeah, nobody gets out alive." And, that's kind of graveyard humor of people who are involved in a very high stakes investigation. And Jim Comey's a big boy and he can do his, he can take care of himself. But that's a bad incentive structure when it's set up that you're kind of screwed no matter how you play it. And I do think, we're probably going to have to develop some norms in which the public has a set of expectations about what people are going to say, and it's not going to be nothing. And it's, and we need to think about that.
Yeah, look, I agree. I sort of feel like this is going to be one of the big challenges, is that to gain public trust, the prosecutors and the head of the FBI, everybody's going to have to show their math a little in a way that we have never done. And look, some of the things you can't show, to be right, and you can't show them because, let's say you don't charge someone, you're not, I really don't like the idea of putting out all the allegations against someone that you're not sustaining and going
you can't show the grand jury information.
Exactly. So, and that's right. It should be secretive, right? I mean, there's a reason these things are to protect people's privacies. So it's not, so there are limits, but there are a lot of things you can show and there are a lot of things you can say, and there is precedent for figuring it out. But I do think, to your point, we've never really said, what's the point in time before an election that you can talk, and what's the point in time before an election that you there are things that might be worth just making rules that people know and people follow. And
totally agree. But also, what's the subjects before an election? So Bill Barr, is saying that he's going to release John Durham's findings, no matter how close to the election it might be. He wants to do it before the election. And because it doesn't involve Joe Biden, it doesn't implicate whatever rule there is. Now,
that's actually not the way the rule works, though. For what matters, the rule is anything that could have an influence on the election, whether or not it directly relates to Biden or not, anything that could potentially impact an election, which clearly Durham's work is meant to, in my view, it's meant to further, Trump's argument that this was never legitimate, 2016. And so it's part and parcel of the election that's coming up. And the question all of us should be asking is Durham can do what he thinks is right and where the grand jury will get to decide. But to me, why can't you wait till November 8th or 10th, right? What is the rush right now for Durham's work, which has waited since 2016?
I mean, I'll go further than that. I think the rules, you can make a defensible argument for all kinds of rules here. There should be a clear set of rules. And it should be clear as to, presumably it doesn't cover traffic tickets, right? There's some de minimis level below which it doesn't apply. It should be clear what investigative steps it does and doesn't include, what crimes it does and doesn't include, and what categories of investigation are categorically exempt from it. It's amazing to me that we've gone this long without clarifying any of these things. Catherine, the floor is yours. And you're even unmuted.
Oh, hi. So I had a funny question, but can I just interject a serious question?
Do the funny question first, because I loved that question.
Oh, okay, yeah. I asked you to laugh for us. You know this, because I've heard you in my ear. Yeah. You have this incredibly infectious laughter. And I seriously need my laughs. And so I asked him the question. I was like, Anne, would you please laugh for us spontaneously? I remember being in the Safeway driveway, and this was after Fiona Hill had testified, that whole state of those amazing people who got up, Vindman, all of them. And you and Preet, and I was like, oh, they have a special. I know they're going to talk, So I have it in my earbuds. And also to hear you say, and Preet, what was so fascinating about Fiona Hill, she said partisan. It's so British. It's so British. I loved it. And then there was this hilarious laughter, and it was great. Yeah. And you guys have great chemistry. So, and also, you're giving everybody a civics lesson. You know that, right? Yeah.
Well, the laughter is the fun part, and we sometimes try not to laugh because it's also serious stuff. But I can rarely make it through an episode without laughing at something. And Preet's also, he kind of hides it. He could be a stand-up comic. He's a very funny guy.
Preet is funny.
He's
Preet is funny.
The way he asks
he's really funny.
He's always ribbing people, you know. Anyway, so can I just do one serious one, and I'll be quick. Okay, so when I
by all means, I said the floor is yours.
Okay, no, I just don't want to be a stage hog. You guys are very, very generous. Okay, so one question for you, Anne. I'm sure you must think about this. So when democracy is generally working like that lovely period in the 90s and the early aughts, you know, you don't really think about it. It's in the background. It's quiet. Okay, I know a lot about Washington, journalists, Washington area, whatever. No big deal. I'm not anybody special. But I didn't know a lot about the Justice Department. I now know a lot more. But I know of it informed in the framework of Trump assaulting it and then the response, right? So it almost feels like the next, whenever this moment is over, that you get like a Chuck Rosenberg to like go out and message, to tell the stories of the FBI, not in a hokey way, not in an egg-headed way, which I find interesting, but like most Americans don't even know what the Justice Department does, myself included. I'm much more educated now, but don't you think that that's like the heavy lifting of the institutional repair, is that people just need to know what this department does overall, and to counterbalance, you know, this horrific, untrue narrative, right?
Yeah,
is that legitimate?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be the last four years have been kind of a civics lesson. And look, I feel like I'm guilty too of having taken our democracy for granted to a certain extent. And look, parties change, presidents change, but this is different than what I've ever seen in my lifetime. And it is really the first time. It's not that I've never seen people who are elected try to use power to benefit themselves and to basically sort of use criminal prosecutions and the rule of law in this way, but not in such a systemic way that I think we've seen during the past 4 years. So I think a part of this is going to be this question of showing your math, making sure the public understands it, and also doing a good job of, like, these institutions have really, part of why people don't know about them is that they like to work behind closed doors, right? And so there's a way in which it's beneficial, particularly in a criminal investigation. You don't want people to know, right? It's better to be issuing subpoenas or going up on wiretaps without people knowing. And then the public sort of gets alerted at the point that a charge is brought. But these institutions do so much more than that, right? Whether it's anti-terrorism work or it's, you know, the FBI lab is hugely important. I mean, they're just huge parts of it that I think we haven't focused on. So, you know, I would be very much in favor of thinking about, like, how do we have a public discourse about the work, and also just the process by which cases are taken or not taken, right? I mean, like, people should sort of understand there are processes. Those, in my view, more should be public, in my view. Again, not the internal, you know, subpoena returns on an investigation showing someone's bank record. No, that should not be public, but sort of how it works and what the process is. I think it'd be very helpful to give a lot more insight into that.
All right. Kate, you're squinting. Is the sun gotten really intense? You're also muted. Kate is inaudible.
There.
We can.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm having like weird sun issues at the moment, but everything is fine. I'm like just enjoying listening to these questions. I think that like my understanding of kind of the work that Anne has done is kind of at a more like a slightly more academic level, but this has been, I don't know, I liked Catherine's last question. I thought that was excellent. I also like your laugh. So there you go.
Thank you.
All right. Having heard from David, who is not Daniel, let's hear from Daniel, who is not David. Which is also, by the way, going to be the subject of our poll today, which is going to go up live in just a moment. The floor is yours.
So I'm curious. So my impression is that norms are easier to break than to reestablish. And if you were kind of trying to rebuild the norms of the Justice Department and justice in general in the United States, what are those steps you would take?
Yeah, so I think that part of the conversation we have to have is what should be laws and what should be norms, right? And that is a part, I think, because we took so many of these norms for granted for so long. I sort of think that it's time, like, we've now seen how much things can be taken advantage of. But remember, there was a special counsel statute. There were problems with it. People thought it was being abused on both sides of the aisle. And so we came back to this sort of DOJ process. But I think when it comes to how to have an independent counsel, right, there was an independent counsel statute. What should that look like? That has to be debated. It could potentially be a law. I worry if it's not a law that, again, it's subjected to the whims of the attorney general. I think there's also conversations happening about the power of the presidency and where there should be limits placed. I think Lawfare, actually, you guys have a book coming out that's Bob Bauer and Jack Goldsmith. I'm super excited about. I think that's one of the
it's a really good piece of work.
But I do think we have to think about it like, what are the norms that were broken, and should those, assuming we agree that they're the right things, and again, with the special counsel, I feel like something should be changed there, because I don't think it should be in DOJ, but should you pass laws? How should you think about putting some things into laws? And then other things can be norms that you think about reestablishing, but it has to be more than people. And I believe that, because it's not just enough to count on having a great leader as the head of DOJ who doesn't abuse the rule of law. Like, we've seen a lot of good leaders as the head of DOJ, a lot of good AGs, but no one should be counting on that. And so, and by the way, I'd say this, I was at civil rights under George W. Bush, and Ashcroft, he was a controversial pick, but he turned out largely to be pretty strong, right, for the civil rights units. I'm not saying that there were no issues, but it was Alberto Gonzalez, when the department became a lot more politicized when I was there. And so, again, I don't think we should be counting on like just changing the people and thinking that will be enough to change the norms.
Owen Sherry, I think you are here for the first time, and are you calling from Pomona College?
No, unfortunately, LA is kind of a mess right now. So I'm at home in the Bay Area, which is also shrouded in smoke. I think it's 200.
It's
200
kind of
AQI
out of the
right now.
It's out of the fire, out of the frying pan into the fire kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's always bright and sunny and temperate on in lieu of fun.
Absolutely. So I guess my questions are twofold. I was curious about, like, how likely do you think it is that the banning grift goes outside of federal law and gets into state law, and is thus ineligible for a pardon? And then second, at least being at a college campus right now, there's a lot of people who are not stoked about Kamala Harris. So I'm just curious, as a former AG yourself, do you have any commentary on her record maybe, or the pressures that one faces in that office? And maybe just give some insight on the decisions that one has to make within that situation.
Yeah, so I did not
Great
overlap
question.
with Kamala, but I will tell you this: there are still in the United States so few female attorneys general that we all know each other, and we have this regular dinner at least once a year where we all meet in Washington. I think it's usually February or March. We did not have it this past year, but I know her through AG meetings and through getting the opportunity to meet with her at dinner. Look, I think, California is different from New Jersey, but what she did with the banks during the mortgage crisis was, I think, a really significant and important thing. And as someone who is an outsider watching that, there was, and just to give you a little inside baseball, there's often like one AG will decide to sue, and then it becomes like a sort of sign on. So other states can sign on. This is what happened with the tobacco litigation, where a couple AGs took the lead, and then all these other AGs joined the lawsuits against the tobacco companies that ultimately led to the massive settlements and all these sort of changes in that space. So what Kamala did was she didn't join the big group of AGs that was suing. She did not think the deal that they were getting from the banks was good enough, and she joined with some other AGs, and they sort of, it's a very hard thing to do, and it takes courage. And so I remember seeing that as an outsider and thinking, like, you know, she played, you know, she played a difficult hand too, right? Because had she turned out not to have a lot of additional money for the people of California, and in fact for the country, there was a new deal that was struck as a result of her actions. But, you know, she sort of stepped into what I thought was a really tough situation. It would have been a lot easier to just gone along. So I've seen her be courageous on things like that. And people don't think about it, but AGs, like New Jersey is really an exception. I had full criminal jurisdiction. Rhode Island has full criminal jurisdiction. Colorado has some criminal jurisdiction, but most state AGs don't. And so I used to sit at these AG meetings, and I would literally be like deciding like what wires we should go up on. And like my co-AGs were like having drinks. They were like hanging out, like nothing chaotic was happening in their office.
People really don't understand that state AGs are not the same office.
Yeah.
I mean, there's your corrective to me earlier about New Jersey not being elected. Some of them have extensive criminal jurisdiction. Some of them have none.
Right.
You know, some of them are.
People
a lot of them have none. And, you know, some of them are kind of, I don't know, sort of almost like, this sounds demeaning to say, I don't mean it that way, but they're kind of civil enforcement litigators who bring what are effectively tort actions on behalf of the public. And a lot of it is performative. Some of them have significant, you know, post-conviction habeas and appellate defense functions. Some of them don't. They're really like they have the same title, and we associate them with the federal AG, but they're not remotely the same office from state to state.
Yes, and I think that's an important point. So, like, when I'm talking about her civil work, that's because that's what most AGs do, and that's sort of where they spend most of their time, frankly, other than, you know, a handful of other states.
So I had my only dealing with her office when she was in California was in the criminal context, which was, you know, she was involved in Did I blip out?
Yeah.
Sorry. She was early involved in prosecuting revenge porn cases at a time that I was concerned that people were a little too focused on revenge porn relative to sextortion cases, which I thought were probably a more serious problem. And so I remember having a sort of admiration for her interest in the non-consensual pornography domain, but also thinking she was missing the boat. But I thought everybody was missing the boat, so I'm not sure I really hold her particularly responsible for that. She did good work on revenge porn at a time when it was, no pun intended, not sexy. And when people, you know, now it's sort of after there have been a bunch of really high profile examples of it, you know, a whole bunch of states have laws on this now, but she was kind of on it before it was cool. And I think that was like, I think she had blinders on about what she was looking at, but at least she took it seriously, which I can't say for a lot of other people. All right, we've got 5 minutes left. Kate, are there any remaining questions in the Q&A that you think we should pose? Some of these are already... We can't hear you, Kate. I still can't hear you.
I can't hear you. By the way, this is like Zoom school with my 6-year-old.
You're muted, Kate, and I can't turn off your mute. Oh, now Kate will come back and she'll be fine. So my other question for you is, how did you, like, this other professional transition for you is like going from being a public official and prosecutor to being a podcaster. And I'm, you had a public role before, but it's different when the role is every day talking to the public, explaining things to the public, arguing things, than when you have a client who is the state on whose behalf you speak. Just tell us about that transition.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. I mean, one of the things about not being in an office or in a public office, and I loved all my government service, and, I think there's no greater honor than to be able to represent the people, like I represented the people of New York State, the people of the state of New Jersey, the people of the United States at DOJ. But then when you leave, you get to say, you speak for yourself, right? To your point, you're not representing the government. And there's something really freeing about it. I teach at NYU. I run a lab there where we do a lot of work on criminal justice reform with local jurisdictions. My secret best job is that I am the technical advisor for Law and Order, SVU, and for a TV show called Power. There's a new one coming out called Ghost. But I've gotten to do a lot of different things, and I also do a little private practice, and that has also been fascinating, and I think really good for lawyers to sit on both sides and to sort of see the 360 of cases. So, in some ways, the podcast with Preet, it happened, I was a guest a couple times with him, and he and I met when we both worked on Capitol Hill. So I was working for John Corzine. I literally took my job. Preet had just started working for Schumer, and I remember like a week or two in, I'd literally gone from, flying all over around the country and the world doing human trafficking cases to sitting in a Senate office where it is a little, like, you guys know this, like I was sitting in a judicial interview and I was like, is this how it works? Like, it's a little like, is this actually like the way the system works? Like when you really see it inside. And so I said to someone, like a very dear friend of mine, like, maybe I made a mistake to leave DOJ. And I was thinking about going to the U.S. Attorney's Office. And my friend was like, just go find Preet. You'll be fine. Like, you'll have a friend. You just need to meet someone like you who hasn't been in politics their whole career. And so, of course, I met Preet, and he was like my, closest friend on the Hill, and became one of my, dear friends and favorite people. So it sort of just happened organically. Like, I didn't set out to become a podcaster. I just have been really lucky to fall into it. And it's great. I get to talk to you guys and all these amazing folks. And so,
it's a great racket we have going. The informative law podcast thing. Anne Milgram, so good of you to join us. This has been super fun.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so
Thanks for having me.
Sorry for all of my technical issues. I don't know why. I just nothing was like quite lining up today, but it was so good to meet you.
It's all right. It's usually me, It's who has the tech problems.
I know. Well, maybe the next 50 episodes it'll be me.
So we're going to wrap up, but tomorrow we have Charlie Sykes of The Bulwark. And we have a great week coming up. All the dates are full except Thursday. We're still waiting to hear from Walter Schaub about Thursday, but we might sub in. Tom McGuckin had a really good idea yesterday of having Margaret Taylor and Quinta Jurecic on to talk about the project we've been doing the last few days of summarizing the collusion findings in the SSCI report. We've made a good crack in that, and by Thursday I think we may have most of it done. So maybe we'll slot that in for Thursday. But in any event, we will be back exactly 23 hours from now, and until then, we don't have fun anymore. So in lieu of fun, grab an old friend and do a podcast, because it's kind of awesome.
I was going to say, we don't have fun anymore, but in lieu of fun, we have 150 episodes today of In Lieu of Fun. So
wow,
yeah, that's getting kind of, we have done every single day since March 25th.
Amazing.
And it's I don't know. It's been fun. See you tomorrow.
Bye.